very important and quite sensitive topic I'm keen to debate with you tonight, because if somebody is a murderer, do you think they should ever receive anonymity? The reason I'm asking you this is in July this year, a 17-year-old boy, Charlie Cosser, he was at a party having fun, as we do. He was horrendously murdered there. Now, a 16-year-old boy has been convicted of his murder. The killer, though, the 16-year-old boy, has been granted anonymity by a judge. Charlie's father, Martin, is now campaigning for what he calls Costas Law to basically stop this. He joins me now. Good evening to you, Martin.
Good evening, Michelle.
Firstly, of course, sympathy goes out to you and all your family. I know this is a very, very difficult time for you as a family, and I'm so sorry for your loss. I was fascinated to hear you calling for what you describe now as Costas Law. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I will do. I just very quickly, for clarity, want to say that they haven't confirmed that they're not going to release his name. That decision hasn't actually been made. But that doesn't make a difference to what Costas Law is and what it stands for. So the reason for Costas Law is the reason we're campaigning for it. Firstly, it's called Costas Law because he was known as Cosser to his friends. But what we'd like it to be able to do is ensure a default where a juvenile killer is named without hesitation, unless there are real exceptional circumstances where it would then go possibly to a board or a panel. I think what's important to remember here, the age of criminal responsibility is actually 10 years old. And the pain we're going through, not knowing whether they're going to release his name or not, has been very hard on us.
I'm going to ask you, what would it mean to you? So if people did know the killer of your child, Charlie, what would that mean? What difference would that make to your healing process, for example?
Well, it would definitely make a difference to our healing process, because I think such a brutal murder, an 8, 9, 10-year sentence, which are the numbers we're hearing at the moment, does not suffice. His name should be in the public domain. What happens if he gets a girlfriend in the future, or, he wants to move on and get a job and start a family? People need to know who he is. We had no choice. We were sat in a hospital the day before they switched Charlie's life support machine off, talking to our family liaison officers about what statement we were going to release. Because if we didn't release one, they were going to release it anyway. And we had to pick a photo that by all accounts wasn't important to us. Well, every photo of Charlie's important to us. So we had to sit down as a family, and it took us over 3 hours to write just 250 words to describe our beautiful dead son.
I'm so sorry. I mean, it brings chills to me. It's just an awful situation. The flip side of this is, yourself, there's been some suggestions on the other side of this. Well, hang on a second, a 16-year-old, what about if he's got mental health issues, or what about, being able to be rehabilitated in the future and move on from this crime? What would you say back to that?
Well, my question would be, what about the effect on our family, a victim's family generally, if I'm speaking generally? How do they know we don't have mental health related issues, or that indeed we're going to suffer from them because of the trauma that we've been through? The reality is we could do. We don't have a choice now. You Google our name and it comes up everywhere. And no one thinks about the consequence of that and what we're having to go through, which is why I now control the media in my own way. So, it seems to me, and it appears to me, Michelle, that everything seems to be, on the side of the defendant. How can that possibly be right?
Yeah, I hear you. Look, you're doing some really good work as well when it comes to raising awareness around campaigning around knife crime. If anyone's got young children, young grandchildren or whatever, what message would you give to those young people?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd urge them to think twice, because a murder you can't take back. And believe you me, you'd only have to spend 6-7 hours sitting and living in our world at the moment to know the pain and destruction you were caused by one moment of pure evil. My family is simply broken. My daughter is 15 years old. My son is 27. He used to work with Charlie. My daughter's just had major surgery on her knee. She's going through hell. My wife can't stop crying. We live in a world that people don't see the bigger picture. They don't fully understand. So I would encourage anybody out there to think twice. How many times, certainly when I was growing up, if there was a problem, there'd be a knockabout in a field or whatever. You'd have it out with each other, even verbally, not with a knife.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Listen, I think you are a remarkable man. I think you're doing really good work at this moment in time, and I wish you success with your campaign. We send all of our love and support and best wishes to your family for your horrific loss. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Martin. This is a really sensitive one. I've got to say, I do agree with the father there. Why should a murderer, a killer, just be allowed to, you know what, I've done an awful thing, but I can kind of have this luxury, I think it's a luxury, of not having that cloud permanently over your head? You're a murderer.
It's a heartbreaking case, and we all sympathise with Mr. Cosser and his family for this tragic and violent loss. I entirely agree with him, actually, and I'm old enough to remember when this arrangement was brought in, whereby juveniles did not have their names publicised when they were put on trial. And I never agreed with it at the time. And not just for the reasons that he says, which is basically in the interests of some sort of parity with the victims and the suffering of the victim's family, in the survivors in this case, the surviving family. But because there's also a public policy question about open and public justice. We've always had a system where trials are public and the public can see what is going on. And if you can show you're innocent, if the court fails at least to prove that you're guilty, then you walk away vindicated, publicly vindicated. Now you have more and more of what I call this secret justice, where you don't know who's being charged. You don't, and I generally disapprove of it. So actually, I would question this not just in the case of juvenile murderers or those charged with murder, but juvenile offenders generally. It was introduced with the best of intentions. Is it working? We ought to look at it. I don't think it is.
Will it get looked at, though?
No.
Why?
Because nobody's that interested.
See that, but that's awful. How do we make people interested then? What do we do? Because surely, if people here are saying that this is something that's wrong,
well, I'd love to hear.
How does Martin and his family get the attention of lawmakers?
Maybe I am rushing to judgment there, and it may be that either a government minister or a shadow minister in the Labour Party says that they are going to look at this, and I would withdraw what I say in that case.
Yeah, I think, Daniel, I think that people are interested. I think that Mr. Cosser is one of the most articulate, powerful campaigning voices I've ever heard or seen. And I think that this is a change in the law that people from all backgrounds can get behind.
Yeah, I think so many people would support this, and I think, you know, I'm going to put some thought into this about, you know, what can we do? How can we get this on the agenda for conversation and review? Because it's not good enough.
It's really easy, Michelle. You know, it's 100,000 people signing a petition that you or somebody else puts up and gets Parliament to start to talk about it. Right, OK. Well, I'm going to have a look into that, because it can't be right. Can you imagine what that family are going through? I spoke to Martin, and it's just it's heartbreaking. I hope none of you ever get that knock on the door, because I can't even tell you what it does to a family. And then you imagine, and as he mentions, by the way, I'll be fascinated to see what this kid actually gets sentenced and how little the sentencing will be in terms of how long that person will have to stay in court. But, I mean, can you imagine if that was your family? You've got a life sentence, all of them, Charlie's siblings and everything. Let me know your thoughts on that. GBviews@gbnews.com is how you get hold of me.